Hello, everyone. I'm Becca, dietitian by trade, mom 24/7, wife from the start, and when there's a few extra hours in the day, you might find me hitting the trails or on horseback.
And I'm Kara, a therapist to women, a mom to a boy, an entrepreneur, mountain junkie, and a postpartum runner.
And this is Fit for a Queen, a podcast that's devoted to the female athlete wanting to balance the teeter-totter of all the things we desire out of life as women. Performance, health, intellect, and taking time for self, even if we only get 1 minute out of the day.
We're so excited to be bringing you the queens in the athletic world who have done just that. Okay, ladies, take a seat at your thrones, grab your crowns, and welcome to Fit for a Queen. Welcome back, queens. We've got Elise on with us. She is a licensed professional counselor based in Austin, Texas, who is passionate about supporting athletes in their mental, emotional, and physical health and erasing mental health stigma within athletic culture. She has worked with athletes for 7 years, from preteens and high school student athletes to professional athletes. She provides support around anxiety, depression, relationships, injury, and retirement, and her main specialty is treating eating disorders in the athlete population. She encourages her clients in strengthening body trust and mind-body awareness and supports athletes in understanding their relationship with self, exercise, body, and with others. She's enjoyed being physically active all her life and has competed and participated in various sports. Her own experiences as an athlete led her to pursue this passion and a desire to positively impact and support other athletes in their most challenging times. Elise, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be talking with y'all today, so thank you.
Well, this is one of my favorite subjects, so thanks for getting all nerdy with me about mental health and athletics.
Mine too.
Yeah, good. I've been talking to clinicians. You know, I was loving the media frenzy around the Olympics and mental health. Mm-hmm. So tell us your take on working the field and your thoughts on more discussion around mental health of the athlete. I'm sure excited to hear more coming out about it. What do you think about the discussion around it these days?
I was so excited. I mean, I love the Summer Olympics because I love track and swimming, but I was so excited that one of the main narratives was around mental health. And we've kind of seen more of a push from this, like from athletes and in the NBA in like 2018. Had their mental, like, mind health initiative and had adopted new rules, like, for every team to have a professional, and then the NFL followed suit and even have, like, added resources for players, coaches, and family members. Mm-hmm. You know, and then we saw the gymnasts speaking out and Naomi Osaka and Dwayne Wade talking about, you know, retirement and seeing a therapist. Then the Olympics, and I was like, this is just amazing. Like, I just feel like it has just, you know, really added year after year, like something has really added to the conversation. And I think some of the important pieces too are that, you know, people of color and Black people have really had a voice in this, which I think is so powerful for breaking down barriers for athletes who, you know, are wanting to access mental health. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also, like, I'm just excited about how this will eventually, like, trickle down to, you know, more universities having, like, a standard, like, mental health professional, or, you know, high school, and, like, just it becoming more commonplace. Yeah, because my hope is, like, eventually, you know, for athletes, it would just be, you know, seeking out a mental health provider could be as normalized as, like, going to a physical therapist. Yeah. And so I just think this is so powerful.
I was going to ask you, Becca, too, because you're working with more athletes than I am these days. And Elise, when you're working with athletes, do you think the stigma of getting help and talking about it? I'm thinking about, it was like 5 years ago, I was speaking with a university program about making a program for athletes and mental health, and they were so concerned about the athlete, like someone finding out the athlete was going to go to the program, that we ended up not even doing it because of the wanting to protect the athlete. So what are you seeing in the office? Are athletes still, like, the stigma around mental health, or do you think it's gotten better?
I'll let Elise speak first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what do you think, Elise?
You know, I have a lot of them in my office, you know, so I'm, you know, I hope more people, but I think, there is still just this narrative of like push through and, don't feel just, but also like there are high costs, right? So like, am I going to lose playing time? And I think just a lot of education for coaches would be really helpful and like athletic directors, because many of them were also athletes, right? So they're coming in with this same narrative. And so I think there could be a lot more education, but I do think like, for example, if you're a young, white female on track team struggling with an eating disorder, you're probably more likely going to get support than like a young Black male on the football team, right? And so like, I think there are definitely still so many barriers for some people.
What do you think, Becca?
Well, that's exactly, I'm going to pick up from that point. I think it's dependent on if the culture is conducive and supportive of mental health and mental health resources. So some schools are great, some teams are great, but it's modeled from administration, coaches, your seniors that are being mentors. If they embrace it, then everybody else will. But if not, they don't want that stigma. So it really has to come from the top down.
That's a really good point. The culture of the program. Yeah. Good point.
So
very good point.
You mentioned like these athletes that are retiring and transitioning out of sport. So for somebody who's retiring, maybe deciding to leave or has to make the decision unexpectedly, what are some of the biggest struggles that you see when it comes during this transition?
Yeah, I think the piece that you just brought up, whether it's a choice or not, is a big piece of it. I think this is a time where there's potentially a lot of like loss of identity. Actually, they have like higher rates of substance use after retirement and eating disorders and depression and body image challenges. I mean, I think even with the pandemic, we all saw like how people lost their like outlets and their ability to cope well. And so I think a lot of identity pieces come into play there.
Other than identity, what are you noticing when it comes to kind of disordered eating? That it's popping up more after, that they've had a history of it and it gets worse? What are you kind of noticing in that world?
What I noticed is like wanting to keep a certain aesthetic, or like if part of a certain aesthetic is or look or, idea of body image is connected with athletic identity, we see like, okay, well, I'm not training as much, so I should just like really control my food, or like, okay, I've got to like try to still keep a certain like appearance to be considered like, athletic or fit in some fashion. And so I think, if it's a control piece or even just like a identity and body image piece of like, wanting to try to control any other change or things like that, some of it is just that, athletes have, trained and eaten a certain way for so long that they kind of have to relearn how to eat in a sense. Yeah.
So in the comparison, let's say somebody has a planned transition, like I'm going to retire after college or at this age. What do you see as being helpful tools for them to ease into that rather than being thrown into it?
Yeah, I mean, I think even getting athletes into my office, like in my experience, like getting them into my office and like already getting to expand like their definition of their identity before they retire is so helpful, because I feel like I've had so many like student athletes, and their definition is, well, if you're not a student athlete, then you're not an athlete. And I'm like, well, what does anybody after the age of 22 do? Is nobody after that point an athlete? And so I think even like just expanding the definition of, what an athlete is, what is like, I think there can be so many rules or ideas on what is a qualifying movement or exercise, and that can be so narrow that they kind of like kick themselves out of their own identity piece. So I think just even like exploring that and expanding, like, how does this still fit into your life? How is it part of it? But also like, what are the other pieces that up until this point, like you haven't gotten to explore or like add to your identity or like really like foster in your identity, and definitely like a time of exploration and just curiosity. I mean, and some of it is life skills, right? So like if, I think depending on when somebody retires, if you're 26 and you're retiring and you're like, okay, well, I've never applied for a job, when a lot of people are doing that, much earlier. And so I think it also kind of depends on when they're retiring, of like, okay, some of it's real basic life skill kind of things. And like, okay, how does this transition to other passions and interests that you have? Like how can you use your skills in another area? And then some of it is deeper, again, just like that identity work of like, how does this still fit in your life? And then like, what are other pieces of your identity as well?
I'm thinking so much about that identity piece as a young athlete who is competitive and very good. There is this encouragement, really, or an expectation that you immerse yourself in this sport, right? Which then you're spending all your time in. And really, that's a really good point you make, that this developmental piece of skills that I should be learning when I'm not, because I'm so immersed in it, can really be, I'm just thinking of like this panic or anxiety of I'm behind, or I don't know who I am, or I don't know how to get my own apartment or the grocery shopping, right? That I'm sure you're working so much. I never thought about that like delayed developmental piece that happens when you're in it for so long.
Yeah. And I mean, even the piece, like something so simple as training, right? Or, once they leave a structured program, they're like, well, I don't even know how to like work out because I've never really done this on my own.
Someone
like,
told me how to work
they
out.
have ideas,
Yeah.
But they're like, I've never just gone by myself and like figured it out. Right. Or, like you said, like got an apartment or all these things. And certainly I think that behind piece, I think that's so important. And then I think too, like, as you're talking about being so immersed, I think it's even harder for athletes where doubly they only have one thing in their identity, which is this athletic piece, but doubly hard when other people only relate and see that piece of their identity, right? So like if you only see yourself that way and other people only relate to you that way, that foreclosure after retirement is so much like stronger in a sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see how that'd be difficult.
So do you have certain tools or even like therapeutic techniques that you like to use with clients to help process and cope during this transition?
I think, a lot of it is, like I said, addressing any like anything major, like an eating disorder or substance use, treating that certainly. And then the practical pieces that we talked about, exploring like relaxation or fun or like, what other movements and sport would they like to be curious about and try out. And definitely just, understanding what are their values. How is that part of who they are and what they want to pursue and continuing their purpose in life? And just kind of probably also like, processing through like different rules they may have, like, oh, I can't be, a coach, or I can't be this, or different things like that of, okay, well, what do you really want to do, And again, back to that piece about really expanding their definitions of what can fit into their identity or what that looks like.
For those that aren't really in the kind of eating disorder world field, we use a lot of this language, but can you define a little bit about what you mean by strengthening body trust and mind-body awareness when it comes to like athletes? Can you talk a little bit about what that means for, someone who's listening that wouldn't understand what that is?
Yes, I love that question. When I'm thinking about an athlete, and this can certainly be true for other people as well, but in the context of being an athlete, I think we can so easily cut off from from the head, right? Like just shoulders down, like don't feel anything. And so just really like, actually, it's amazing how many athletes like come into my office and they like aren't actually connected and in tune with their body because like they've just really had to cut it off, right? And so really like being able to listen and, understand the cues that their body is sending them and being able to trust themselves and like what message they're getting, I think even just a simple piece of this would be like knowing, I feel like I've talked to so many people who knew they were injured and other people told them they were fine, so they kept playing, and they knew something wasn't right with their body, but they just said, okay, well, I'll keep doing it. And I think that's just such a tangible example of like, okay, trusting your own body, and then having your body be able to trust you to care for it well, and you know, do what you need to do for health, and being a little more connected there.
I'm just thinking, how often or how much is an athlete being told what to do with their body in terms of training, or even like, nope, keep going.
Or what's normal, right? Like, oh no, just no pain, no gain.
Yeah. And then now all of a sudden, no one's telling me what to do, and now I'm in charge of this thing, right? Like, yeah.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. And even with the food piece, right, of like they're told what to eat. And like, so even having to learn that, right? Like relearning hunger fullness cues, relearning like, okay, how do I actually feed my body? Like, you know, and certainly with our diet culture, which is so pervasive within athletic and, you know, fitness culture, you know, that's all about not trusting your body, right? And having some kind of external control. And so, I think that's really prevalent for athletes, and like, okay, external control of the food, but then what does it mean to really like be in tune with your body around that?
Good
stuff. In tune. That's probably a really good word. Yep. In sync.
Tuning in.
Yeah.
I think clients that struggle with eating disorders are really uncomfortable with like, no, I do not want to tune in.
My body's over here and my brain and mind is over here.
So it is like that tolerance, right? And also athletes aren't used to like sitting down. I mean, they're active, obviously. So it can also be such a distraction from our feelings.
That's why I always had a lot of respect for Phil Jackson. Like, there's a great example of a culture that embraced, like, mental health.
Phil Jackson, when he did a lot of meditation, right?
Yeah, and then if you watch the documentary that Michael Jordan had, like, when they were about ready to break, he didn't kick them off the team if they said, like, Coach, I need a mental health day. Like, he said, okay. Or, like, when Dennis Rodman went to Vegas and didn't come back, he just sent the guys, like, go get him. He's having his moment. And just was very, like, holistic in how he handled all those personalities.
Way before meditation, mindfulness got popular. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I think too, like maybe there's been more of a discussion somewhat around between athletes, but I think also like there's a outside perception, you know, usually that athletes are, you know, superhuman in some sense, right? And so, you know, I think some of it is just really more of like a general population needs education, you know, that about their narratives of athletes, and like, you know, athletes are human and, you know, experience the same things and like need support as well. So
you're right. I've been hearing, and I think that's what listeners and viewers are wanting, is like the human story behind the athlete. I mean, we're seeing this, was it Alex Smith and his injury, the football player? Like, we're tuning into these stories because of the human being experience, as well as you are an athlete. I know Michael Phelps is really big on we're human beings as well as athletes. And I think that's such a great way to continue to obviously talk about this. Elise, you're doing great work, and thank you so much for being on. We like to end every interview with asking you how you live out the FIT philosophy of balancing performance, health, intellect, and taking time for self. How are you doing that in Austin, Texas?
Yeah, well, I think we've all learned so much about that in the last 2 years.
Absolutely.
Still learning.
I don't know about y'all, but being a mental health therapist through the last 2 years has been relentless. It's been challenging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we all
it's been grueling.
We need a support group.
Yeah. So, you know, I think first I just try to give myself a lot of understanding and grace that it's not going to feel perfectly balanced ever. And like some things will take priority, and then not to completely lose my time for self, obviously, and like creative outlets, because they support me in whatever my current priority is. But I think I tried to stress less about like, it's all got to be balanced, right? Like that does not help. And then and even just like understanding my own temperament, I think is helpful I come from like a family, like we are workers, like we are workhorses. Like we just have that narrative, like within my family culture. And so I think also like understanding myself and knowing my default would be to overwork, and just really being in tune with myself and noticing like, oh, I'm like getting a message that like I need more movement right now, or like I need a break, or things like that. And like just honoring that, I think it's really helpful that I know my temperament.
Mm-hmm.
And then I can just be very like aware of like setting boundaries around that, of like my default is to take on too much work. So let me make sure I don't do that,
Man, I think it's so special and a key to like when you know your stuff and yourself, and then you get your needs met based on that. I mean, that is magic when we find that out. In tune, yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Then I can know like, okay, when I need more like social time or more movement, or, like doing fun things like podcasts, or, talking at a university or whatever it is. Those are all fun things. And still like, okay, I can just really notice when one is kind of lower than it would feel nice. And so, okay, how can I bring some more attention over here, but not in a way that's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe, super like, hypercritical of myself around it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being on and doing the work you're doing, and also being a listener to us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys. I had so much fun. I love your podcast, and I love that y'all are just, spreading just education for other people, and like allowing other people to feel connected and get whatever support they need as well. So I think that's awesome.
Elise.
Reaching the masses.
Well, thank you so much. And you have a great day, and we'll see you out there on the social media world.
Sounds good. All right, thank you.
Bye,
Bye, Queens.
Bye, Queens.
Today's episode is brought to you by yours truly. I'm excited to announce the releasing of my book, Finding Your Sweet Spot in Sport, Avoiding Relative Energy Deficit in Sport, also known as RED-S, by optimizing your energy balance. Be sure to follow me on social media or go to my website, www.beccamccombel.com. Bye, Queens.
For additional information on today's topic and guests, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Fit for a Queen. And
Hashtag Fit for a Queen.
don't forget to rate us on iTunes. We can't wait for you to join us next time on Fit for a Queen.
Bye, Queens.